We spoke last night about reincarnation. And we spoke too about the need to articulate a new metaphysical understanding in terms of which we can think intelligently about these phenomena. And we spoke too about how the phenomenology of reincarnation and life after death is impossible to separate from the phenomenology that are studied in parapsychology. And so we're working on articulating a metaphysical framework, a way of thinking, which is adequate to everyday common sense and to science as we now know it, to an expanded science of parapsychology and to to the larger destiny of our personality. It turns out, rather handily, that this metaphysical understanding also allows us to wrap our minds effectively around two other phenomena which are very badly in need of explanation. And those two phenomena are self-organization and evolutionary emergence. It turns out, and I find this, it's always great when this happens, that the solution to the problem of reincarnation and life after death is also the solution to the problems of self-organization and evolutionary emergence. Now let's talk about those two phenomena. Self-organization is an idea that's become current since the 1960s. It was brought into currency by Varela and Maturana. And the idea is that when systems of entities organize in the world, at a certain point, they can become self-organizing systems. And now Maturana and Varela are saying that what it means to be alive, that all the properties of life follow from the fact that living beings are self-organizing systems. And a lot of scientists like that because it's sort of reductionistic, but not exactly. And so it allows us to begin to have some feeling that life can be brought into a kind of scientific mode of understanding. But the idea of self-organization is actually a little bit paradoxical when you think about it deeply. Because a self-organizing system is a system that produces the components and processes that it needs to produce the components and processes that it needs, right? And so it's recursive in that way. It's a system which is set up in such a way, it's a what do they call that? A homeostatic system, more or less, that takes its own existence as the variable which it holds constant. Right? Now, people talk about this idea, but nobody has any clue about how it can happen. Right? So scientists can tell us about dissipative structures. Dissipative structures are structures in reality like the ring in the bathtub that it makes as the water's going down. It's this cyclone-like feature. It's an organized system that happens when there's energetic throughput. And scientists can explain that, but they can't explain what happens when a dissipative structure makes the next step and becomes fully self-organizing, or autopoietic, you might hear it described that way. So this is one mystery that needs explaining. And another mystery, which is also deeply vexing, and that a lot of people are working on, is the problem of evolutionary emergence. How is it that in the course of evolution, new properties and new qualities emerge in the universe? Now, this seems to be a huge problem because remember, in the scientific mode, especially the reductionistic mode of science, the idea is that all of actuality is founded on these units like atoms or quantum collapses or bits of energy or whatever it is, and that these entities, let's just stick with atoms as it's simpler, right? That these atoms have all the characteristics that they're ever going to have fully and completely forever and always. They just are what they are. So imagine Newtonian universe, because this makes the problem really acute if we start there. Imagine this universe that's a three-dimensional grid, Cartesian grid with these little small BBs running around. And the question is, how can any combination of these little BBs ever become alive? Doesn't seem possible, right? How can how can hydrogen and oxygen become water if they're just atoms? Why would any spatial arrangement of BBs ever be anything but a spatial arrangement of BBs, right? So this is the problem of evolutionary emergence. How can something new come into the universe? So these two problems are really acute in the scientific world today, and I want to show this morning how the new approach that we're articulating here gives us a way of wrapping our minds around those two phenomena while simultaneously making it possible to explain parapsychology and life after death. Okay, so I want to introduce a new technical term. Right, so this is it's sort of like an unveiling, right? It's like when they break a champagne bottle on a new ship, right? This is a new technical term that I am introducing. And this technical term is the waking world. Right? The waking world is just the world as we experience it when we're awake. Right? When we're not sleeping, when we're not in trance, when we're not on psychedelic substances, right? Just the waking world. And the reason this term is important is because generally we confuse the waking world with the physical world. We say, we live in the physical world. And we think the physical world includes things like people and animals and lamps and pictures and so forth. But actually, it doesn't. Right? The physical world is the world studied by modern physics. It's the world studied by the methods of physics. And the physical world is strictly inorganic in its nature. Right? Physicists study subatomic particles and atoms and molecules, and those are all dead. They're not dead. They're inorganic. They're not dead, as we said last night. They're living in their own simple way, but they're inorganic. They're not living beings. And so as we look around us, right, we can see there's a physical world. There really is such a thing, right? There are these dense, inanimate objects that surround us. And even the living beings that we see have inorganic components. But the world that we see is not the physical world per se. The physical world is just atoms and molecules and quarks and fields of energy. It's not pictures and people and anything like that, right? So I want to distinguish between the physical world and the waking world. And I want to speak about the properties of the waking world, which, as we'll see, are more complex and richer than the properties of the physical world itself. But before we get into that, let's look at the physical world. Right, so just look around for a minute and notice that you're seeing a very complex picture. The kind of picture you see in a dream is what you're seeing here. Right? Entities like people and lamps are not, strictly speaking, inorganic. Something else is going on there. If we saw the way an inorganic being sees, all we would see would be fields of force. Right? That's it. But we see other things. So what is this physical world? And what is the place of the physical world in the waking world? And in order to answer this question, I want to introduce the concept of grade. So last night we spoke about actual occasions. And actual occasions, as we said, are occasions on which something actual happens. Actual occasions. And we said that every actual occasion, and we ourselves are examples of actual occasions. As you listen to me, you are a sequence of actual occasions. Real things are happening. And as I speak, I am a sequence of actual occasions. But actual occasions are not all equal. They're not all alike. So the simplest actual occasions that we usually discuss are quantum collapses, subatomic particles that are instantaneous blips. But in the theory that I'm suggesting here, an atom, which is a system of subatomic blips, is itself an actual occasion, organizing lower grade actual occasions. And then a cell is an actual occasion, organizing macromolecules and so forth. So that it's actual occasions all the way up and all the way down. But the actual occasions that organize the lower grade occasions are more complex. Right? So actual occasions come in different grades. What this means is that there isn't just matter and mind, as we usually think in Western philosophical terminology these days. But rather there are these entities, actual occasions, which are both material and mental. Right? They're drops of experience on the inside, so they're mental, but they're causally efficacious actualities on the outside. They're events on the outside, so they're physical. So the physical and the mental, right, the material and the conscious, cannot be separated. They're always together in everything actual. But actualities differ in the richness and complexity of their process. Let me make this clear. I know I haven't done it yet. So we've said that every actual occasion is a process. This is very important, right? There is no such thing as a vacuous actuality. There's nothing that just is independently of time. Everything that is, except for the abstractions and the possibilities, but every real actuality is a process. Right? It comes into being, and its life is this process of coming into being, just as we in each moment come into being by a process. So all entities come into being by a process. And at the inception of every actual occasion, there's an actual world out of which it emerges, just as we always find ourselves emerging out of a world that's already there. And every actual occasion also has a position, right? I am somewhere in the world. I'm not just in the world in the abstract, but I am right here in relation to all of you. So every actual occasion is in an actual world. It has a position. There's always a spark of consciousness. Every actual occasion is aware of itself in some way, however primitive. There's always a quantum of free will. Every actuality is a quantum of free choice. And finally, every actuality has an aim. It's going somewhere.